Hi, this is Rick for EDU Mobile. Now we're going to talk about the activities and activity life cycles. So here we go. Every activity in an app has its own life cycle. It is born, it lives, and it dies. There are 5 running states for an activity. These are the states in which the activity can be said to be actually running. A 6th state, which is called the destroyed state, also kind of exists. Destroyed is entered when the app is fully exited by the user or when a system destroys the app. In other words, to get memory back, to reclaim memory. Every state transition, though, is signaled by a callback method that we can access within our activity to find out where we are and to perform certain functions when states are transitioned from one to another. So these callback methods are these. There is onCreate. The activity is first invoked, and it is transitioning at this point to the created state. So created is a transitional state. The app is not going to stay in created for very long. OnCreate is called, and then created is entered, and then very, very quickly onStart will be called. On start, the activity is becoming visible, but no interaction is possible with the activity at all. At the end of onStart, the activity transitions to the started state. So like created, started is also a very transient or transitional state. It is going to a 3rd state very rapidly called resumed. And when that state transition occurs, a method called OnResume is called. Now, at this point, the activity is visible, and it can also be interacted with. This is the resume state. This is also called the running state of the activity. The user will perceive the resumed state as being the only state that an activity is ever in. It is fully visible, and the user can interact with this state. Now, resumed, therefore, is kind of the default state for an activity. An activity can live for a very long time in resumed, unlike created or started. Now, when an activity is being dismissed or another activity is going to cover it up, either partially or totally, on pause is going to be called. And the activity will now enter the paused state. Now, I say here that the activity is either partially hidden or becoming entirely hidden. So there's 2 things happening here. Partially hidden means another activity is covering up part of this activity. The new activity becomes the interactable activity. In other words, the new activity is going to enter the resumed state. But the background activity, the activity that is partially covered, will sit in the paused state until the activity in front of it either gets dismissed or something fully covers up the paused activity. So from paused, we can go back to the resume state very easily. But if that activity becomes completely obscured, or if it's on its way to being completely dismissed, then onStop will be called. The activity at this point is entirely hidden, and it is in the background. It is entering the stopped state, but the activity could still be restarted at this point. So these are the 5 main states, the running states of an application: created, started, resumed, paused, and stopped. Now, I said that there was a 6th state called destroyed. We can think of it as a state. Really, it's on its way to completely inactive. In other words, not running at all. So there's no way to poll to see if an activity is destroyed. The only way we know that an activity is becoming destroyed is that its OnDestroy callback is called. The activity is going to be entering the destroyed state momentarily, and this either happens as a result of the user quitting the app or the system reclaiming memory. Now, destroyed normally only happens after paused and stopped have already been entered. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. So let's look at a picture. These are our state transitions we've already talked about. The app starts, the first activity starts, a new activity is becoming visible. On create is called. We enter the created state. On start is called. We enter the started state. Blue in this slide means not visible. Yellow or brown means partially visible. And green means completely visible and interactable. So from created, we call on start, and started is entered. And then very rapidly, we call on resume, and resumed is entered. And this is where our activity is living. In other words, it can be interacted with by the user. Now, after our activity, the interaction is completed, the user switches to a new activity, something else happens, we call, or on pause is then called, and we enter the paused state. Now we can also sit in paused for a very long time, because remember, we could be partially obscuring the activity, and so this first activity would be sitting in paused for the duration. I'm not talking about how to get back to resumed in this slide, but in the next slide we'll see that. And then finally, on stop is called, and we enter the stopped state. So these are the state transitions we have talked about to this point. Now let's look at some others. First of all, if we are in the paused state and we want to resume the activity, let's say that there is a partially obscuring activity on top of this one, that activity goes away. A callback method called OnResume will be called, and then we re-enter the resumed state. Likewise, if we're in the stopped state, OnRestart is a new one. OnRestart and then rapidly OnStart are called, and the app is, or the activity is restarted, and we enter the started state. So this would be when an activity is called back up after it's been completely hidden. There is that last state transition to the destroyed state, and that red arrow at the bottom represents the OnDestroy callback. Now this is so important that I produced a PDF of this slide presentation to this point, so you have it as a reference, and that will be included in your materials for the course. Let's talk about OnDestroy a little bit more. The system will normally only call OnDestroy only after it's caused on pause and on stop, even if the user quits the app from the resume state. So if the user quits the app and let's say the user is in a particular activity. The user quits the app. What happens is on stop, well, on pause, on stop, then on destroy are called in very rapid succession. The only thing that can bypass this is, let's say an activity is intended only to transition to another activity. So you bring up an activity at the beginning of your app, and its only function is to display a list, let's say, of other activities, and then the user can choose from that list. And if an activity is only to make a point of decision in onCreate, let's say, where a user can transition to another activity, then we can call the finish method inside onCreate to immediately destroy the activity. And in this case, this is the only case, in this case, the state transitions through paused and stop do not occur. We go straight to OnDestroy, and the app is destroyed. Or the activity, I should say, is destroyed. Thank you very much.